Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. I wanted to thank you for joining us for our BBB Flash webinar, and I want to thank Affordable IT for coming in and presenting for us today. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to them and let them introduce themselves, tell you a little bit about their company, and then we'll get started.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for this presentation of viruses, hackers, and malware. Oh my. We'd like to thank the Better Business Bureau for having us here, and I'd like to say I'm James. I'm here from Affordable IT. We provide managed services, that's IT and help desk, as well as cloud services. We do a lot of remote desktop for folks, as well as backup and business continuity. So if you're in need of any services like these, go ahead and check us out at affordable-it.com. Let's go ahead and get started here. First of all, let's say who I am here. I'm James. That's me. I've been working professionally in IT for about 10 years at this point. I'm a people person. I mostly work help desk, so I interact with the people who use this technology every day as a means of doing their work. And who is this presentation for? This presentation is for end users, so we're talking about non-IT employees who want to do their part and understand that a little bit better. It's also for decision makers, so I'm talking about high-ranking employees with some say in IT who are not necessarily technically minded. Moving right along, I've included some ransomware statistics here that Datto has provided for us, and these are just scary. And I think if you're here watching this webinar, you probably realize that there's a lot of nasty stuff out there that you should try to do your best to avoid. So yeah, this is all just kind of to give you an idea of the kind of things that we're looking at. It's a big problem, especially ransomware at the moment, that can be avoided with just some simple things. This is the biggest piece of this that I think you should see that we got from Datto is this quote here: "At least one employee will click on anything." And in my experience, that is absolutely true. So the more employees we can have informed on what they should be looking for and what they should avoid, the better off we can be together. So why is this happening? Of course, because of money. Infected computers can be added to something called a botnet and sold. So a botnet is, you might say, but what use is my computer, James? I have a 10-year-old PC at home. What good is that going to do? Well, if your PC is infected, it can be then added to one of these collections of computers, and their combined processing power can be sold as a means to attack larger targets. It's a quick, cheap, relatively, and easy way for someone who, with nefarious intentions, to get the processing power that they need to achieve some goal. Also, stolen credit cards and identities can be bundled and sold. That's just people who either want to buy something they don't want to know that they paid for, or people who want to buy things they can't pay for. Also, a lot of your computers on your network can be made into mail servers and be used to send out spam. I haven't figured out the numbers on the spam thing because it doesn't seem, I don't know anyone who's ever bought anything as a result of receiving a spam email, so I'm not sure where the monetization comes from on that, but it must be there because we all receive so much of it. The big thing to remember is this is a numbers game. If 1 out of every 10 doors that you knock on opens, you're not going to spend a lot of time knocking on each door. So if it's not easy to get you, it'll be easy to get somebody else. So they move along pretty quickly if you protect yourself. How are they going to get me? Let's talk about that a little bit. We've got phishing scams. So those are kind of ways to get you to put your sensitive information into a form and send it along to somebody else. Weak passwords. This is a big pet peeve of mine because, as it turns out, the way we've been conditioned to create passwords over the last 20 years it makes it very difficult for us to remember passwords and very easy for a computer to guess them. We will talk quite a bit about that a little bit later. Social engineering. We all live in a world where we're expected to put a lot of information about ourselves online that we kind of probably thoughtlessly make very, very public. And some of that information can be used against you in these kinds of attacks. Open attack vectors, this is where it gets kind of techy. I'll just give you some things that you can say to your IT people if you are one of these decision makers to make sure you're protected from some kind of basic things that can be looked over. Malware, which I'm going to spend less time on than most things because I think it's the easiest thing to avoid, but I will tell you the things you need to know, as well as ransomware, which is just another kind of malware. So let's start with phishing. Phishing is something that I see quite a bit these days. Now let's take a look at a login page that we see probably every day. If you get a message from someone, and I'll tell you a story of something that happened to me personally. I got a text message one day that said, hey, check out this crazy video of you. And I tapped on the link, not knowing who this person was, and I brought up a page like the one you see here. Now, if you look carefully, you'll notice that in the URL at the top there, that does not say facebook.com. That's going to be your biggest clue. So this is going to come up several times. This is my main tip. Slow down. When you're presented with something, especially if you're presented with something you are not expecting, just look at it for a second before you go ahead and enter any personal information. You'll also notice that it's an HTTP site. This is a little more technical. Your large corporations are going to use HTTPS because that encrypts the information as it moves across the internet. So if you're going to a bank site, they're definitely going to use HTTPS. So if you're directed to somewhere and you don't recognize the URL or it looks kind of fishy, just take a step back and take a moment. So let's look at a comparison. Here's the real facebook.com. You'll see it is an HTTPS site. You'll see it does say facebook.com. And you'll also notice that the one we saw previously was a very good forgery. And I've seen a lot of those in my travels where some of the forgeries are indiscernible from the real thing. Okay, so they have your Facebook password. So what? Lots of hackers use a technique called brute force. This means that they guess as many passwords as they can. They'll usually use a computer program to do this. But what if they had a list of passwords that they know are real, viable passwords that are used? They do, and it's really easy to get a copy. Where do they find these known passwords? Well, you just typed yours into that fake Facebook page. Do you use the same password for everything? You probably do. So as a result, now they also have probably a lot of your other passwords. So how do you avoid things like this? Again, slow down and be careful. So just being mindful of what is in front of you in your web browser is going to go a long, long way. Be skeptical. Be aware that every email that comes from an unfamiliar source is trying to kill you. This is sound advice because, yeah, back away slowly. I see a lot of people that get requests for money transfers money transfers are not a part of their everyday work, and they email me and go, hey James, is this real? And I have to go, would you usually be the person to do a wire transfer? And when they say no, I go, okay, well maybe reach out to the person and ask them. When something appears on your screen and you don't know what it is, my advice is back away slowly. Tell your IT people. Don't apologize for being annoying. We are annoyed, but we will be far more annoyed if you don't tell us and the whole network breaks. More importantly than that, and more seriously than that, determining the severity of a potential security breach is not your job and it is not your responsibility. If you have IT people, that's what they're there for. We're going to move along to passwords now. Everything you know about passwords is wrong. So what makes a strong password? Well, you might say it has at least 8 characters. It is mixed case, so you've got uppercase and you've got lowercase letters. It has a number in there, maybe 2. It's got a special character, so an exclamation point or an ampersand. No, these things are not good enough. Let's talk about something called a passphrase. So we're talking about something that is 16 to 24 characters. Mixed case still helps to give some diversity to the maximum number of potential passwords if someone's trying to brute force hack your password. But numbers and special characters become more unnecessary in this format. And The best part is you can use a combination of common words. So this makes the memorization of these passwords much easier. Where did I find this information? Why do I believe this? This is a great webcomic from, they're called XKCD. It's an engineer who does these webcomics, so they're very nerdy. A lot of them are way over my head, but this one here makes a lot of sense. So your usual password that maybe your online services are trying to get you to make is a mix of letters, numbers, symbols, mixed case, and you're going to try to pick a word and then substitute letters with numbers to try to match their requirements. In the second panel, you'll see a lot of math that tells us why this would take a standard computer about 3 days to brute force hack this password if they wanted to do it. And also you find it very difficult to remember these passwords because they are very complex, though very relatively ineffective. So in the next piece we will see, we've picked 4 random common words. In this case, they're all lowercase. There's no numbers. We'll see the math here. This would take your average computer 550 years to guess that password. And because it is just 4 common words, it's much easier for you to come up with some kind of a mnemonic device to remember that password. I've got the URL here of the website that I pulled this from if you want to take a second to check that out. I've included a link at the end as well, so we will see that one more time. The password, this site here actually includes a password generator, so you can put together your criteria for what you want your password to be. It'll just generate random passwords based on that criteria. I use that to generate passwords for our clients all the time. It's a great resource. And if you check out this comic a little bit more, you will see why this makes a lot of sense, and it's just generally more secure. The other problem, of course, is that we all use the same password for everything or some slight variation on it. I am very guilty of this, and it's not a good idea. So I'm going to tell you not to do it with the implicit understanding that you probably will still do this. So it's a good idea then to keep track of which accounts you have that have the same passwords, because if one of those accounts gets hacked, now that password is part of that list of short list of passwords that they're going to try first to brute force hack an account. So you need to change all of your accounts that use that password if one of them is hacked. There are some tools that will make this work a lot easier. I use a piece of software called 1Password. It sits in my web browser, and I've got 1Password. It's a big long password that unlocks it, and then it saves all my different passwords for my accounts in 1Password. I don't have to fill them in. I find the account, I click it, it opens the page, it logs in for me, and then I can, like my PayPal password, because they got hacked recently, I switched that, by recently I mean a couple years ago at this point, it's very fresh in my mind apparently. I made it make a 32-character random password. I don't know what my PayPal password is, but when I need to access it, I open up 1Password. They've even got an iPhone extension, so I can use it on my iPhone when I'm in Safari. It's for PC, it's for Linux, it's all out there. LastPass is a very similar piece of software. LastPass has a very interesting feature that will actually log into your account and change your passwords for you. So if they know that the account was hacked, they'll give you an alert, and you can just go into the software, change the password from there, or have them generate a new random password for you. It saves it into LastPass. You don't have to think about it. This makes password management much, much easier. Okay, let's move on to social engineering. Social engineering takes advantage of information that you make publicly available. I will also sometimes use security vulnerabilities that exist when you mix 2 unrelated systems. I'm going to show you an example that used a flaw in Amazon to break into an iCloud account. I think a lot of these have been patched since then, but these are things that are running around out there, and they're a good reason to think twice before you post certain information. So there was the case of a Wired journalist who some hackers were trying to hack his Twitter account, which they eventually successfully did. and they were, as a result of the process, able to get access to his iCloud account, which then allowed them to wipe his iPhone, his iPad, and his MacBook, just completely erased. You'll see a little bit of detail here of how they managed it. Because they're so detailed, I'm sure some of these have been patched, but at the time you were able to call Amazon and just say, I want to add another card, and they'd let you, and then you could just hang up. And then you could call back and say, yeah, I need to reset my password, and go, well, verify with the card, and you could verify with the card that was just added. Then you were able to use billing information to reset an iCloud password, and then they were able to get in. And once they were in the iCloud, iCloud was kind of the central point on this one because iCloud includes an email account, so they were able to get in and then do all kinds of password resets with the email account. But some of these things, you know, it may be a better idea in your Amazon account to do something that is a little bit inconvenient in not saving your credit cards. Because you don't have to. You can enter them every time if you want. It makes things a little bit more difficult, but it definitely makes them more secure. So this leads us to the big takeaway here, which is be careful what information you make public. There's the other place I spelled LinkedIn incorrectly. I forgot to correct that. Don't put info that might answer your security questions onto your Facebook or LinkedIn profile. I did a lot of thinking about LinkedIn while making this presentation because I think a lot of people, I definitely, before I thought about this, considered LinkedIn to be a safer place to put your information. When you think about it, it's a fairly public place where people can go and see this information. So if you put a bunch of information about your business on there that you assume has some level of privacy, you may want to rethink that idea. Two-factor authentication will definitely save you. If you go back and read that Wired article, the gentleman speaks about how if he had had two-factor authentication turned on his Gmail account, which ended up in the mix at some point as well, they would have been stopped immediately. They wouldn't have been able to, because he would have gotten a text message on his phone that would have prompted him for authentication, and they wouldn't have been able to get that. So that does seem inconvenient sometimes too, but two-factor authentication with things like your Apple ID or your Gmail account, excuse me, can save you a lot of headaches. And that mixes things, something that you know, which is your password, with something that you have, and that is your cell phone. And so they'll send you a verification code, and then you have to enter that. That really helps with someone's ability to get into your accounts. A big one that you may not think about is when you register a domain, and this is a little more technical as well, but if you buy a domain, if you buy a .com, if you can spend a couple extra bucks to register that domain privately so that your business's information doesn't come up if someone does a whois lookup. My personal strategy for that has been to just not update my ICANN information every year when they ask me to. So if someone does a whois lookup on me, they get my parents' address because that information is very, very old. Yeah, here's the big one. Don't publish your billing address on social media. If that information is easy to get, that can be a central point where they can use that information to, if they can find other pieces of information to go along with your billing address, that makes some things a lot easier. Also, is that email really from your coworker? That email that you got with a link in it that is asking you to do something? It's okay to reach out to people. I don't think anyone's going to think you're stupid or question you if you make a phone call to say, hey, is this email I got really from you? Do you really need me to wire you money? Is this document really encrypted? Do I really need to turn on macros? I think it's worth making that phone call real quick, and chances are it's not. So, do you usually wire money as part of your job? We already talked about that. Yeah, so if you're getting a money wiring request, that's another version of social engineering. Oh, and just step back on the is that email really from your coworker bit. I have seen a lot of places lately where they've either been able to spoof an email address, and this is where social engineering comes in. They go to a business's website. They know who maybe the top 3 people are at a company because that information is available. And so they'll either get an email from like steve@thething.com, and because it looks like it came from Steve, who is their boss, they're more readily interested in going ahead and doing what the email says. Just because it says it came from Steve doesn't mean it necessarily came from Steve. The other interesting thing I've seen lately is that someone will register a domain that is just slightly misspelled from the actual domain. So, you know, it'll be at thethink.com, and you'll Steve at thethink.com, and you're expecting an email from Steve at thething.com, and you scan it quickly. You go, oh, here's that email from Steve at thething.com that I was waiting for, and you put an implicit level of trust on it that is probably not warranted. So again, this is where slowing down comes into play, kind of checking things out a little bit, and just being a little skeptical. Open vector attacks is our next piece, and again, this is a little more technical, but this is some stuff that if you have an IT department or an IT company who takes care of things with you, these are some things you can bring up with them to cut some things off that are kind of simple or can be simple if you do them beforehand. So chances are your organization has some kind of a firewall. I have one at home that AT&T provided me. It's part of my modem and router. There is some firewall functionality on there. And whether you host your own services or not, so a lot of you might have an email server that lives on your own network. Some of you don't. Some of you just have your own personal computers. Maybe it's you and a couple of other employees. Maybe it's just you. But you should go over your traffic policies for your firewall with your IT person, because it's easy to say, okay, well, we don't have mail here, so we're going to block outbound mail, because maybe you get a virus on one of your computers on your network, and now your network is sending out spam, and that can cause all kinds of headaches with different services around the net, and you might find yourself getting blocked from things because people go, oh, this IP address is sending out spam, so we're going to block this. But if you have no need for mail traffic to be sent out from your network, then you can just block that traffic, and it's kind of mail server traffic, so it's not just email being sent from your computer, because that's going to be sent from your computer to an email server, which is going to send it to another email server. So if you don't have an email server, you can block a lot of that stuff. So I'm going to tell you another anecdote. I set up a Linux server on our in our data center once to host a website, and I kept the ports for SSH open. SSH is just a command line interface, and it's common in Linux, and I just needed to be able to access it, and I wanted to be able to do it right from my computer at home without remoting into another computer. So I left those ports open. Well, it turned out there was an SSH vulnerability, and someone hacked into our website, and they started using it to attack other servers, and whoops. So that's something you can talk to your IT department about, to say, like, hey, if we've got stuff on here, let's not be lazy. Let's set that up. So here's some specific things. If you host your own email server, it's a good idea to use an external spam filtering service. A, because spam is so rampant right now, and I don't see it getting better anytime soon. So that's going to help you with that. But the really nice thing it allows you to do is you can have your IT people just keep traffic, mail traffic, restricted between your mail server and your spam filtering service. And what that is if a server that sends spam knows that you have an IP address that receives email, they can just send mail directly into your mail server. Well, if it's blocked to every server except your spam filtering service, they can't do that anymore. If they want to send you spam, they have to send it through your spam filter, and it'll catch all that stuff. And that's one of those instances where if they go, oh, there's no easy way for us to just send spam directly in here, they're just going to stop trying, because there are other mail servers that they can just send that into. Block all unnecessary ports. This is where I was lazy and I wanted to just connect in from home. And since then we have said, no, we're not going to do that. I remote into a server and I connect to those ports from the server inside the network. So we were able to just block all those ports, and that's something that you can do as well. You can use non-standard ports for the services that you need. For example, remote desktop. If you have a remote desktop server on your network, that uses port 3389. So someone going, hey, I see that there's a network here. I want to see if maybe I can connect to a remote desktop somewhere on this network. I'm going to try port 3389 for that, because that's the default. And if you go, well, we're going to switch it to port, really any other port. you can switch it to any other port, and then someone trying to connect to a remote desktop, they can't. They're going to see that they're going to try it on the default port. They're going to find that they are denied, and they're going to probably move along at that point. This is called security through obscurity. Use this phrase when you talk to your IT people. That'll show them to talk down to you. All right, let's talk about malware. I'm going to kind of summarize some things, and then we're going to go back and look at them a little bit more in depth. You have to have antivirus. You have to. I have a Mac, and I don't have antivirus. We're getting to the point where people say that Macs can't get viruses. That's a misnomer. They can. They just usually don't. Things are less created for the Mac, and there are some things built in the way the operating system that makes it more difficult to proliferate on the Mac. Although if they had more than a 20% share of the market, they would probably have a lot more malware running around. Don't turn off user account control. We'll take a look at that a little bit more in depth. Ask your IT company to disable executing programs from the app data folder. This is, again, a little bit more technical, but it's something you can just bring these words up with your IT people, and they can work with that on you. Don't turn on macros ever for any reason. I have yet to run into a company that uses macros for a practical purpose in their Office documents. I'm sure someone does, or they just would have gotten rid of the feature in Office, but you're going to see a lot of email coming in these days that's going to ask you to turn on macros. Don't do it. So antivirus is really a stopgap. Malware and anti-malware is a cat and mouse game. The people who are trying to create these exploits, they kind of leave the past behind them, because once the exploit is known, it's protected against if you've got antivirus. But if you don't have antivirus, the history of malware just can try to run free on your system, and that's not good. So the antivirus is going to help protect you from everything that has come before. Yeah, there we go. See, antivirus by its nature does not prevent against zero-day exploits. Those are security flaws or malware that are still unknown to the security industry at large, so they cannot protect against them. It's still really difficult to make anti-malware or antivirus that can determine the intention of a program. So they have a database of known malware. So they go, is this malware? Is this malware? And they go, no. And they go, okay. So they move forward. But if there's something that they don't know about, it's very difficult for them to protect you. User account control, let's talk about that for a second. This is something that can save you. It started in Windows Vista. You'll see a little image of it. You've probably seen this come up on your computer before. When a program requests admin access, it's going to come up and prompt you. If you remote into a terminal or remote desktop server for your work every day, if you see one of these, it's probably followed by a prompting for admin credentials. This is great because you as an end user cannot run this software. You have to involve IT if you really want to get around this. But if you're just using a personal computer, you can just click yes. Mac has a similar feature. It's the same kind of thing. It's built in. It'll pop up and go, hey, do you really want to run this program and give it admin rights? And if turned off, a program requesting admin access will get it without user interaction. So you can go into your control panel and you can turn this off. And if you do, whenever a program goes in and says, hey, I want to run as admin, the operating system says, great, go for it. So if you see the user account control box and you didn't run a program, or you're not expecting something to pop up, just click no. Restricting the app data folder. This is one of those more technical things that if you've got an IT department or an IT person, you can bring it up to them. This can and should be done on networks where PCs are members of a domain, and it works great on a remote desktop server because it's a change that just gets made one place. You don't have to mess with group policy or anything like that. Because most malware tries to avoid early detection by running its executables in the app data folder. Now, each user has one of these folders, and in most environments, a non-admin user is allowed to execute code here. I'm going to give you a non-scary, non-malware example. Google Chrome usually installs through the app data folder, which is why if you're an admin who wants to make it hard for someone to install Google Chrome on your server, you've got to jump through some hoops because it doesn't go through the usual process of installing itself for the system at large. It goes, hey, I can just install this for this user, and I'll just put it in the app data folder, and nobody has to be involved to get admin rights. So restricting the app data folder will prevent other things that you don't want running on your system from just having access to that folder. And most software that you are running, especially enterprise software, doesn't need to execute code in app data. And if your IT people can set this up for you, it's also really easy for them to whitelist applications that do need to run code in your app data folder. And so if you've got IT people and you go, hey, let's restrict that, and they can do it, then they're just as capable of bypassing it for individual applications. Macros, let's talk about macros. This has been a huge delivery device for malware lately. I have been seeing these a lot. These are executable code used in Office products to do complex equations or bring in dynamic data from external sources. That's their intention. But you'll see the operable word here is executable code. So this is a great way for someone to bring in software like malware or ransomware that they're trying to sneak in and get you to run on your system. These are off by default. Most users, as I said before, do not need to use them. If you open a document that asks you to turn on macros, just don't do it. Contact the sender, ask them about the document. Did they mean to put macros in it? From my experience, they probably didn't even really send you this document. This probably came from a nefarious source that was able to trick you into thinking it came from a person who you trust. Here's a great example of one I've seen a couple times lately, and they've come up with a great, I would call this social engineering, a great socially engineered reason for you to turn on macros. They go, hey, this encoding is incorrect, but if you turn on macros, you'll be able to read this document. So you go, okay, great. I'll turn on the macros and I'll read this document. It's not going to work out. Don't do it. Make a phone call, send an email, verify that this email is what it says it is. All right, we've gotten to ransomware. Before the presentation, we were talking, and I mentioned that when I first saw ransomware about 4 years ago, I kind of thought, well, this whole internet thing has been fun. I guess we're done now. I was terrified. I thought no one's going to ever want to use a computer again. Ransomware is malware that will generally run on your PC, and it will scan your hard drive for your documents, your Word documents, your PDFs, your Excel files, and it will encrypt them. And it encrypts them really well. And they want to charge you money to get that data back. Like I said, it's software that runs on your computer, so all of the kind of safeguards and just common sense things we've talked about before will definitely help you from not getting ransomware. Hey, I've said that already. What is really interesting about, and I think I forgot to mention this in here, is that if you are on a domain, if you're a user who sits down at a computer and logs in, and you have a shared drive somewhere that has a drive letter on it, ransomware loves that. Because they're all programmed to go and seek that out. So if you've got a connection to that your server drive, it's going to go and encrypt any documents that you have rights to. It kind of just runs rampant. Like all other variations of malware, there is no way to 100% guarantee that you will not be victimized by this ransomware. So how do I protect myself? Have a backup. I thought this was the best place to get to have a backup because this is kind of where it's going to have the greatest amount of impact on you is if you get hit with ransomware. But a backup will help you with everything else we've talked about today. Really, any catastrophic thing that can happen on your computer, if you've got a solid backup, you can continue working in a relatively short amount of time. Seriously, any kind of backup. I don't care what kind. We love and use a software called Datto. It kind of makes managing and running backups in a way that we really wanted to 4 or 5 years ago, but seemed arduous and too hard to manage. It makes it really easy to manage. And if your IT people are trying to sell you this, they're not just trying to make money. I'm sure they are, but they're scared because they're the ones who have to try to put all this back together if something happens, and they want to make sure you're protected. So any kind of backup. but maybe not any kind of backup. What's in a backup? What's going to make a good backup for you? I just want to dispel you against relying on syncing cloud services like Dropbox, or iCloud has a syncing folder now for the Mac, because if you get hit with ransomware and you're using a syncing program or Google Drive even, the encrypted version of the file will just be synced over the good version of the file in the cloud. So your program will just do its job and sync the changes. Now, a lot of these do have versioning, like I believe if you're using a professional version of Dropbox, it will have some kind of versioning. So there is some safeguard there, so if it gets overwritten by an encrypted version, you can, once you get the infection cleared up, you go back to the previous version of the file. But I wouldn't rely on that. There's too many X factors there. Now, something with a system image, that's going to be a good backup because it allows you to restore to a completely different computer in the event of a catastrophic loss. So if your computer just dies and you go, I need a whole new computer. Wow, even the hard drive was bad. If you've got a system image, you can restore that on another machine. Now, what's great about that is Windows and Mac, and I believe Linux does as well. Don't hold me to that, but you know they're the most technical ones. I'm sure they have a feature like this too. They have built-in free tools that will do these things for you, that will create versioned system images so that you can go back and get a single file, or if you need to restore your entire system, you can do that as well. Best case scenario, you want to also have an off-site backup, and you can do that just by swapping out a hard drive, or you can do that by having some kind of a system. Again, we love Datto because it makes that really easy to shoot a backup off-site, but really anything. That's kind of the end here. Let's go in conclusion. What are we talking about here? What I've covered today mostly falls under common sense. And as I've said, a lot of these rules I'm really bad at following, but they really will help you. It's mostly the rules my mom told me when I was 12 and we got our first 56K modem and we were going to connect up through the library. And she kind of said, don't open things you don't know about. Don't trust that anyone is who they say they are. These are all the things that you still need to keep in mind. Slow down. Once again, slow down. If you're presented with something you weren't expecting, take a moment, take a breath, check it out, be reasonably certain that it is what you wanted it to be, expected it to be before moving forward. Involve your IT people. If you have IT people, that's what they're there for. And I know some of you probably pay for IT by the hour, but it's going to cost you a lot more to bring them in to rebuild everything than it is to call them up and ask them a question and go, hey, am I going to be okay if I do this? Change your passwords. This is a big one. A lot of these sites get their information hacked or divulged on a regular basis. I forget who it was just recently. I think it was Dropbox. They were hacked in 2012, and they had the data recently became public. I think it was 2 or 3 months ago the data dump showed up on Reddit. So if you had an account with them a couple years ago, it's a good idea to, well, change your password, but change all your passwords that you use the same password for as well. If you post information online, it is public information. And again, I want to, for whatever reason, when I was making this presentation, LinkedIn really stuck in my mind because I've seen a lot of people put a lot of information on LinkedIn. But it's a mostly open community, so this rule still applies. You should not assume that this information cannot be accessed by anyone. Have a backup. Once again, any backup. Windows has a built-in backup. Go buy a hard drive. If it's just you and a couple of employees, or even just you, go buy a backup drive. It's a USB hard drive. They are cheaper than they've ever been. Plug it in, go to Windows Backup, and set it up. On the Mac, when you plug it in, it'll just come up and say, hey, do you want to use this for Time Machine? And the answer is yes. But that's it. Have a backup. Here are some references I've included. There is the XK password is the password generator that I use. It's got that little webcomic in there. It kind of explains the logic behind where I think we should be moving with passwords. And this Wired article is a long article. It's very scary, but a lot of the exploits that were used to achieve that have been changed, but there are probably more that we don't even know about. It's a very interesting read. If you are so inclined, it is kind of technical, so if you're not, don't worry about it. That's it. We'd once again like to thank the Better Business Bureau. I'm James Pequeno here from Affordable IT. You can find us at affordable-it.com. Let's